Hello, this is a video where I'm going to be talking about the 7 deadly sins of bad RPGs. Now, even a good RPG can have any one of these, but when an RPG has has committed 2 of these offenses, you're going to be in for a very bad game. So without much ado, let's get into it with the first deadly sin of video games. After the cut. So the first example of this that I'm going to give is, well, one of the most egregious of these particular things, which is Skyrim. Now, a lot of people like Skyrim. I am not one of those people. I don't think Skyrim's very good. And frankly speaking, I put a lot of time in Skyrim, but basic vanilla Skyrim is basic as fuck, and that's not a good thing, in my opinion. So, why is this a problem with RPGs? Well, RPGs, much like any other game or any other activity, you start off simple, right, in order to get people into something, but over time, you're supposed to go into more complex things, okay? We might all start reading, when we're kids, simple shit like see spot run, run spot run, but if you're a 50-year-old man or woman and the only book that you ever read was see spot run, run spot run, there's something wrong with you. You might be an idiot, because you have to go with more complexity as time goes on. You know what I'm saying? That's just kind of weird. Okay. So that being said, more complexity is preferred with certain types of games, not less complexity. And a lot of people are going to get mad when they hear that. I don't particularly care. I don't think games should be less complex, especially RPGs. Now, if something's a starter RPG, yeah, something like Silver Saga, the game that the company that makes that game just keeps on remaking it about. It's basically the same game over and over again. Yeah, fair enough. It's a starter RPG, but I mean, a franchise shouldn't be just overly simplified to the point where all complexity and depth is lost, which is what's been happening with games these days. A lot of games have gotten stupider and stupider and more dumbed down and idiotic, if you will. And like I said, the most egregious of this is Skyrim. A lot of people are like, I love Skyrim. Skyrim feels like a RPG for people who don't like RPGs, which, if you don't like RPGs, why play them? And that's what Skyrim feels like. Both Skyrim and Fallout 4 feel like that. It's like, oh, well, I don't like RPGs. Well, if you don't like RPGs, don't play RPGs. Go play some other shit. But, for the people who make these games, don't oversimplify them. So with that being said, that's the first cardinal sin, which is oversimplification, or oversimplification, streamlining, and or being a basic bitch in video games, which is not a good thing. So with that being said, let's keep it moving with our next cardinal sin of gaming, which is, well, which we'll introduce after the cut. Now, once again, I'm going to use Fallout 4 and Skyrim as an example. Player agency. Now, what is player agency, you might ask? Well, player agency is essentially the feeling that the choices you make as a player are affecting the overall narrative thrust of the game. maybe not the overarching narrative, but at least enough that you feel like your actions have consequences. Now, the problem with a game like, you know, Elder Scrolls or Fallout or Skyrim is that Elder Scrolls or Fallout 4 is that, you know, you don't, like, your choices have no real effect on the overall game, essentially speaking. Just, it's the same shit over and over and over again. And there's no real, you know, like, what you do has no effect. It doesn't mean anything. You know, like, you know, if I'm playing a BioWare RPG or an Obsidian RPG or even a lot of JRPGs, you know, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go to my save and make this choice and see what happens. If you're playing an RPG and none of your choices are actually having any effect on the overall story or anything like that, that JRPG sucks. I mean, that RPG sucks in general. Because basically, you know, what does it matter? Nothing you do matters. Nothing you do is actually making anything better or, you know, more exciting or anything. You're basically stuck with the same bullshit over and over again. And that's disheartening if you're playing an RPG. I mean, you know, anyone can tell you that. That is very disheartening to play an RPG and feel like nothing you do actually matters. Nothing you do is really, is really doing anything. And, I mean, if you're playing an RPG and that's going on, like, there's no, like, everything you do just feels like nothing's going on, that's not a good game. And yet a lot of RPGs are like that these days. You know, and I cited Fallout 4 and Elder Scrolls. Elder Scrolls not as much as Fallout 4, but both of them kind of lack a lot of player agency. Like, you can make choices and the overarching narrative doesn't really change. What's going on in the game doesn't really change. And that's kind of disappointing for an RPG. So with that being said, let's move on to the next example, the next cardinal sin of bad RPGs after the cut. So, this is a big problem with a lot of games these days, is that you have characters who don't really have character, for lack of a better term. Case in point, let's look at something like, let's look at something like Elder Scrolls Skyrim. Your character has no character. And you could say, you know, the counter argument to that would be, well, you know, these characters have character because these characters are, in fact, just essentially, you know, these characters are characters within characters. Or to put it more precisely, your character's personal qualities are all essentially tantamount to what you do as a gamer. You know, people love to make that example. Well, they're just, you know, for example, you know, your character in Elder Scrolls is essentially the sum of the choices you made during your playthrough. But that's kind of like, and that would be true, except for one small problem. Most of the choices you make in the game have no real effect on the overall narrative of the game. You know, I would normally agree with that statement, except, you know, other games have your choices actually have consequences and drive the narrative thrust of what's going on. Case in point, let's say you're playing Fallout New Vegas. That game, very much, your choices very much determine what happens later on in the game and how characters interact with you. You know, if you're a dick to the NCR will start sending hit squads after you. If you're a dick to the Legion, they'll start sending hit squads after you. You know, if you do good things for people, people will begin to respond to you in a way that essentially kind of, nets you, people will treat you a certain way. And that can net you access to certain cool things and caveats. So, I mean, your character actually has character in these games. I would argue even Chrono Trigger, where Chrono is very much kind of a blank slate type of character. Over time, he becomes he gets a lot of character. Even his first action that you don't have control over, that the narrative gives him, is him jumping into a friggin' into a time portal to save Marl. He doesn't know Marl from Adam, but he's gonna save this girl he doesn't know because he's the hero. So even there, that kind of gives you a narrative thrust on the character and what his character is, for lack of a better word. He'll help someone he's never known. Now, of course, if you in that game you go through the Millennial Fair, you can be a dick too, and the game actually keeps up with those. If you steal someone's lunch, if you steal a kid's money, if you try and make Marl sell her mother's precious pendant, So there's consequences, there's agency in and these are shown through the character. So we'll get to the next cardinal sin, number 4, after the cut. There's an old saying in comic books that a hero is only as good as his villains. And I have to agree with that assessment. A hero is only as good as his villains. A hero who is not, who has a shitty villain, doesn't even feel that enjoyable, really. I know some people are going to get mad when they hear that, but it's true. And I can prove it, because, look at a game like Final Fantasy VI, okay? Like, everyone remembers Kefka, because Kefka was a very twisted, evil villain. He was like the Joker with superpowers, which is a terrifying thought, really, And that made him into an interesting character, into an interesting villain, Sephiroth, who for some reason people really love, even though I think he's kind of a shitty villain. Was memorable for a lot of people because he killed Eris, and because he had a good theme song, I guess. I don't know. I've never been that enthralled with Sephiroth as a character, so forgive me if I'm a little on the I don't really give a shit about this character. But people who like that game, that's how they feel about it. So, one of the major cardinal sins that a bad game will commit is having villains that are just forgettable. Like, for example, or villains, I should say, who are just, like, overhyped, and then you actually get to fight them and it's bullshit, like Alduin in Skyrim. Or the Reapers in Mass Effect. Yes, the Reapers were full of shit. Or the main villain in Mass Effect Andromeda, Like, you gotta have villains that are more badass, you know what I'm saying? And not just, oh, well, they did this. It's lazy, So with that being said, we can move on to the next cardinal sin after the cut. So, a a lot of JRPGs are guilty of this, where they have overly convoluted plots just for the sake of having a convoluted plot. One of the big ones is Final Fantasy 13. Now, I beat that game, and if you asked me to tell you what the plot of that game was, I couldn't do it. And I beat the game, and I still don't know what the plot was or what the overarching motivations for the villains were in that game. And that's not good. You should never not understand what the plot of a game is. Even some of the worst Western RPGs I've played, I can tell you what the plot is, what the characters were trying to do, everything. Like I said, if you put a gun to my head and said, tell me the plot of Final Fantasy 13, couldn't tell you. I know it involves something about going to another world, and Lightning, the most stoic, annoying female character I've ever seen in an RPG, is there, and that's about it. Like, I couldn't tell you what else is going on in that game. And that's not good. That's not good gameplay design. Final Fantasy 15 does this too, where essentially in order for you to get the full story, you have to look at all this supplemental material. Look, if you have to go and read supplemental material in order to understand or enjoy a game, that is not a good game. All right? Not by any stretch of the imagination. I don't care what anyone tells you. That game is not good. And I don't care what anyone says. That can't be a good game because, everything you need to know about a game should be in the friggin' game. But, what do I know? So with that being said, let's move on to cardinal sin number 6 after the cut. If you're playing a video game you don't like the main character, there should normally be some type of side character that you like. Like, for example, back in the day, I wasn't the biggest fan of Chrono. But instead, I was more of a fan of Frog. So basically, depending on, no matter what your gameplay style was, there would be someone who you could like and enjoy. You know what I'm saying? And that's good gaming. You know what I'm saying? Good gaming incurs, well, hey, you don't like this character, you can go with this character. Now, if you play a game like Skyrim, most of the companions suck, except for one DLC companion whom you kind of knew or did not know, which kind of sucks, I don't think that's cool, to have a character that you kind of like in a game. So, you should not have, a good RPG should have side characters that you enjoy. If you don't enjoy the main character, or in addition to the main character. And if they don't, that's bad. That's not good gameplay design. So we'll get to the number 7 cardinal sin of gaming after the cut. So the final cardinal sin of a bad RPG is the one that in some ways hurts the most, when all of the components to make a good RPG are there. You have a great story, you have good characters, but then the premise of the RPG is even interesting. But then the execution is total shit. The best example I can have of this is a game like Golden Sun Dark Dawn, or Mass Effect Andromeda, or Fallout 4. Like, all these games had really good premises, but then the execution was like, this kind of sucks. Which is not cool. It's not cool to have a premise that's really interesting and then the execution is total shit. Because, you can have the most grandiose plans, but if you can't execute them, it doesn't mean anything. That's basically what it feels like when you have certain games. Best examples, as I said, a game like Mass Effect Andromeda. The concept of going to a completely different galaxy and, having this exploration settler vibe going on sounds cool, until, you know, the game actually comes out, you play it, and you realize, oh, they just basically did the main villains of the game are a palette swap for friggin' the Reapers from the other 3 Mass Effect games. Like, literally, they did nothing new. It's embarrassing. So with that being said, let's get to the next, to the conclusion after the cut. So, in conclusion, if you see an RPG that has 2 or more of these in place, it's probably not that good. For example, case in point, you know, look at Fallout 4. Fallout 4 suffers from great concept, you know, boring main character, really shitty, a lot of the side characters are shitty. A story that's kind of like underwhelming. No real player agency. You know, just like a lot of things falling apart. And you can see where this kind of begins to make things fall apart. It's sad, but that's the way it is. So with that being said, tell me what you guys think about this topic. Or what are some RPGs that you felt kind of also essentially kind of fell apart? So that being said, that's the end of this video. We return to our normally scheduled programming this Wednesday. We will be having a podcast Wednesday and Saturday, 7:30 p.m. to 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's going to be fun. So with that being said, peace and good night.